There's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with thunder. It doesn't shake the room when it enters. Most people walking past it would never notice it was there at all. And that's exactly why so few ever recognize it stirring inside them, because they're waiting for a sign that looks like fire in the sky, when the real thing is moving quietly under the surface of an ordinary life. My name is Walter. I've spent a long stretch of my years watching people, not from a pulpit, not from a stage with lights in my eyes, just sitting across from them at kitchen tables, on porches, in the slow hours when a person finally tells you the truth about what's been happening to them. And I've come to notice something that I want to put into words for you today, because I think you're one of the people it applies to. There's a power being released in you, and it isn't the kind the world knows how to measure. Let me explain what I mean, because I don't want you to hear that and reach for the wrong picture in your head. When most people hear the word power, they think of force, volume, the ability to make things bend. They think of someone loud, someone dominant, someone who walks into a room and takes it over. And the world rewards that picture constantly. It puts those people on screens. It hands them microphones. It tells the rest of us that if we're not commanding attention, we must not have anything worth saying. But I've watched that kind of power up close, and I'll tell you something I learned the slow way. It burns out. It runs on fuel that has to keep being supplied from the outside. Applause, money, the next conquest. Take any of that away and the whole structure starts to shake, because there was nothing underneath it holding it up. The power being released in you is built differently. It doesn't need the room to notice. It doesn't run on applause. And that's precisely why the world has never quite known what to do with it, because it can't be bought, it can't be flattered, and it can't be taken from you by anyone who decides they want it gone. I want to walk through some of this with you, slowly, because if you are who I think you are, one of the set apart, one of the chosen, one of the 144,000 the old text speaks of, then what's happening inside you right now is not random, and it's not small, even on the days it feels like nothing at all. Think for a moment about how the Spirit actually shows up in Scripture, not in the polished version people preach on Sundays, the real version, with all its strangeness intact. When Elijah stood on the mountain waiting to hear from God, there was a great wind that tore the rocks apart, and God was not in the wind. Then an earthquake. God was not in the earthquake. Then a fire, and God was not in the fire. After all of that, and after the loud, the violent, the spectacular, there came a low whisper, a still small voice, and that was where God was. Sit with that. Everything the human eye would call powerful, God passed straight through. He wasn't in the display. He was in the quiet that came after, when the noise had spent itself and there was finally room to hear something true. I think about that passage a lot because it tells me something the world will never advertise. The most concentrated form of power in the universe chose to arrive as a whisper, not because it was weak, because it had nothing to prove. Force shouts. Authority can afford to be quiet, and that's what's being released in you. Now, I said I'd tell you something of myself, and I want to keep that promise because I don't trust a man who tells you how the world works without showing you where he learned it. Years back, I knew a man, I'll keep his name out of this, who by every visible measure had nothing. He worked with his hands. He lived in a small place at the edge of town. He never once raised his voice in all the time I knew him. And I'll be honest with you, the first stretch of our acquaintance, I underestimated him. I did. I figured him for a simple man living a simple life, and I left it there. But I started to notice something. People came to him, quietly. A neighbor whose marriage was falling apart. A young man who'd gotten himself into trouble and didn't know how to get out. A woman who'd buried her husband and couldn't find a reason to get up in the morning. They didn't go to the loud men in that town. They didn't go to the successful ones with the big houses. They went to him, and they came away steadier than they'd arrived. I asked him once how he did it, what he said to people that changed them, and he looked at me like the question itself was a little funny. He said he didn't do much of anything. He just listened, and once in a while, he said the one true thing he could see. That was it. No technique, no performance. He just carried something, and being near it did something to people. That's the power I'm talking about. I watched it operate for years before I had the words for it. A man with no platform and no title, moving more lives than anyone in that town, with a name on a building. And the world had no category for him. He didn't show up in any ranking. No one would ever have called him powerful. But he was. He was the most powerful man I knew. So when I tell you the Spirit is releasing something in you the world has never witnessed, I'm not handing you a slogan. I'm telling you what I've seen with my own eyes in flesh and blood in a man the world walked right past. Here's what I want you to understand about why it's never witnessed it. Why this particular kind of power keeps catching the world off guard. The world has a sorting system. From the time you're small, it's measuring you. Are you fast? Are you loud? Are you charming? Are you useful? Do you produce? Do you climb? It sorts people into rows and decides early who matters, and the sorting is so constant, so much a part of the air you breathe, that most people never even question it. They just spend their whole lives trying to move up a row. But the thing being formed in you was never going to show up on that system. It doesn't register. It's like trying to weigh light on a kitchen scale. The instrument simply isn't built for it. So the world looks at you and, by its own measurements, often concludes there's nothing remarkable there. You might have concluded the same thing about yourself. You might have spent years wondering why, with everything you carry inside, your life on the outside has looked so plain. I'd gently suggest the plainness was never the truth about you. It was just the limit of the instrument doing the measuring. Think about Joseph, sitting in that pit, and then in that prison. By every visible measure, his life was a catastrophe. Sold by his own brothers, falsely accused, forgotten by the man he'd helped, left to rot for years he'd never get back. If you'd walked past his cell and judged by what your eyes told you, you'd have seen a failure, a man whose life had come to nothing. But something was being formed in that prison that could not be formed anywhere else. The patience, the discernment, the ability to stand in front of the most powerful man in the world and not flinch, not flatter, just speak what was true. None of that came from comfort. It was forged in the exact place that looked, from the outside, like ruin. By the time Joseph stood before Pharaoh, the power in him was undeniable. But it hadn't appeared overnight. It had been accumulating quietly. In every year, the world had written him off. The pit wasn't the interruption of his story. The pit was where the power was made. I want you to hold on to that because I suspect some of you are in a version of that pit right now, and you've been reading it as evidence that something has gone wrong. I'm telling you, it may be the opposite. The places that have pressed on you the hardest may be the exact places something is being forged that the easy road could never have produced. There's a reason the Spirit works this way, and it's worth saying plainly. Power that comes easily can be lost easily. A man who's handed everything never learns what holds when everything is taken. But a person who's had to find their footing in the dark, who's had to keep their integrity when no one was watching and there was no reward for it, that person builds something that can't be shaken loose. The depth of the testing becomes the depth of the strength. So if your road has been hard, I'm not going to insult you by pretending it wasn't, but I will tell you that the hardness was doing something. It was setting a foundation deep enough to hold the kind of weight most people never get to carry. There's a moment in the Gospels I keep returning to because it cuts against everything the world believes about how strength is supposed to look. Jesus, on the night before the worst of it, doesn't gather an army. He doesn't rally a crowd. He goes to a garden, and he kneels, and he sweats, and he asks if there's any other way. And then he gets up and walks straight into the thing he could have run from. The men who arrested him thought they were the powerful ones that night. They had the swords, they had the numbers, they had Rome behind them. But every honest reading of that scene knows who actually held the power, and it wasn't the men with the weapons. It was the one who chose not to call them off, who had every right to and didn't. That's authority of a kind force can't touch. The ability to absorb what's coming without breaking, and to choose it on purpose. I bring that up because the chosen tend to think their breakthrough will look like winning, like the moment they finally get to walk in and dominate the people who overlook them. But the deepest power almost never looks like that. It looks like the strength to stand in the hard place without becoming hard, to take the blow and not pass it on to the next person, to be wronged and not let the wrong rewrite who you are. That's rarer than any victory the world celebrates, and it's exactly the thing being built in you. Now let me say something about what this power actually does, because I don't want to leave it abstract. It's not the power to control other people. Let me be clear about that, because the world's version of power is almost always about control, getting others to do what you want, bending circumstances to your will. That's not this. This power moves in the opposite direction. It's the power to remain yourself when everything around you is trying to make you someone else. That sounds small until you've lived long enough to know how rare it is. Most people are shaped entirely by their surroundings. Put them in a fearful room and they become afraid. Put them in a bitter crowd and they grow bitter. Put them under pressure and they fold into whatever shape the pressure demands. They have no center of their own. They're just a reflection of whatever's pressing on them at the moment. The person with this power is different. They walk into the fearful room and the fear doesn't take. They stand in the bitter crowd and the bitterness slides off them. The pressure comes and they don't fold, because what they're made of was settled somewhere deeper than the pressure can reach. They're not louder than the room. They're just unmoved by it. And that, over time, changes the room, not because they forced anything, but because something steady in the middle of chaos draws people toward it the way cold hands move toward a fire. I think of Daniel in that account, taken from his home, dropped into a foreign court designed to dissolve everything he was. They changed his name. They changed his diet. They tried to remake him from the inside out into a man of Babylon. And Daniel just stayed himself, quietly, without a speech about it. He didn't lead a rebellion. He didn't shout. He simply did not bend on the small things and the large ones, and that unbending quality made kings come to him for answers no one else could give. The empire that tried to absorb him ended up depending on him. That's the shape this power takes. And notice the cost he was willing to pay for it. When they made it illegal to pray, Daniel didn't make a scene about his defiance. He didn't go looking for a fight. He just opened his window, the same as he always had, and prayed the way he always had, knowing full well what it would cost him. The lion's den came out of that. But here's the thing people miss in the story. The miracle wasn't only that the lions' mouths were shut. The miracle was a man so settled in who he was that the threat of being torn apart didn't change his routine by a single hour. The power was in him before he ever went into that den. The den just revealed it. It's also the power to see clearly when everyone around you is confused, to carry peace into a situation that has no business being peaceful, to say the one true thing at the right moment that a person has needed to hear for years. That last one, I've watched it land in people's lives like a key turning in a lock they'd given up on. One true word spoken by someone carrying this, and a thing that was stuck for a decade comes loose. That's not natural ability. You can't train your way into it at a seminar. It's something that gets released in you when the Spirit decides the ground is ready. And I believe, for a lot of you watching this, the ground is ready now. That's not a small thing to say, and I don't say it loosely. But I've learned to recognize the season when it's on someone, and there's a reason this found its way to you today. Let me bring up something that might be sitting in your chest as you listen, because I don't want to pretend it isn't there. A lot of you have felt alone in this. Set apart, yes, but set apart can be a lonely word. You've sensed for most of your life that you don't quite fit the world's sorting system, that there's something in you the people around you don't see and maybe can't. And that gap between what you carry and what others perceive can wear on a person. It can make you wonder if you imagined the whole thing, if maybe you're not chosen at all, just strange, just out of step. I want to speak to that directly because I've sat with people in exactly that place, and I know how heavy it gets in the quiet hours. The loneliness you felt is not a sign that you were wrong about yourself. It's a known feature of the road you're on. Read the lives of the people in Scripture who carried real weight, and you'll find that almost none of them were understood in their own time. Moses spent 40 years on the backside of a desert before anyone knew what he was. David was anointed as a boy and then went right back to the sheep, carrying a calling no one around him could see. For years, the prophets were mostly resented by the very people they were sent to. Being set apart has always come with a stretch of being misunderstood. That's not the failure of the path. That's the toll of it. There's a hard moment in Elijah's story that doesn't get preached enough. Right after the biggest victory of his life, calling down fire in front of the whole nation, the kind of public triumph most people would trade years for, he collapses. He runs into the wilderness, sits down under a tree, and asks to die. The man who just witnessed the most spectacular display of power imaginable was days later alone and emptied out, and convinced he was the only one left who hadn't given up. And what does God do with him in that state? No lecture, no rebuke for the despair. He feeds him, he lets him sleep, and then gently he tells him there are 7,000 others he doesn't know about, others carrying the same fire, scattered where he can't see them. I think about that whenever the loneliness in the chosen gets brought up, because here's what it tells me. Even the ones who feel most alone are almost never as alone as they're convinced they are. There's a whole hidden company of the set apart, scattered across places you'll never visit, carrying the same thing you carry, feeling the same isolation you feel. Each one sure they're the last of their kind. You're part of something far larger than your eyes have ever shown you. You just haven't been given the map. But here's what I'd ask you to consider. The fact that you've felt different your whole life, that you never could quite make yourself fit, no matter how hard you tried, that is itself part of the evidence. The world's sorting system rejected you because you were never meant to be sorted by it. You weren't built for that row. The misfit feeling you've carried like a wound may turn out to be the fingerprint of the very thing being released in you now. I said something a moment ago about wealth and purpose that I want to come back to, because the chosen often get this part twisted, and the confusion costs them. There's nothing wrong with prosperity. Scripture is full of people God blessed with abundance. Abraham was rich. Job was restored to more than he'd lost. Solomon's wealth was a wonder of the world. Material provision is not the enemy. But notice something about those accounts. The wealth was never the point. It was the byproduct of something deeper. Abraham's real inheritance wasn't his flocks. It was the covenant, the promise, the relationship. Job's restoration was real, but the turning point of his whole story happened before he got anything back. In the moment he met God face to face in the middle of his ruin, and his questions finally fell silent. Look closer at Solomon too, because his is a warning as much as a blessing. When God offered him anything he wanted, he didn't ask for riches. He asked for wisdom, for the discernment to lead well, to tell right from wrong, to carry the weight he'd been handed. And the wealth came as a result of asking for the deeper thing first. But watch how it ends. Later in his life, when he chased the pleasures and the accumulation for their own sake, when the abundance became the point instead of the byproduct, it hollowed him out. The same man who'd had everything wrote that all of it, chased on its own, was vapor, wind, nothing you could hold. The richest man alive telling you, from the far side of it, that the riches were never where the substance was. The power being released in you may well bring provision with it. I'd not be surprised. People who carry this tend to find that doors open, that resources arrive, that the very steadiness they've built becomes valuable to others in ways that come back around. But if you chase the provision and ignore the power, you'll end up with neither that lasts. Seek the depth, and the rest tends to follow it like a shadow follows a body. Chase the shadow alone, and you'll spend your life grabbing at something that was never solid to begin with. I learned that one personally, and not gently. There was a season of my own life, younger man, hungrier, more sure of myself than I had any right to be, when I went hard after the visible kind of success, the recognition, the provision, the proof that I mattered, measured in the way the world measures it. And I'll tell you, I got some of it, enough to know the taste. And the taste was nothing I had the thing I'd been chasing in my hands, and I felt emptier holding it than I had reaching for it. That hollowness was one of the more important things that ever happened to me. Though it didn't feel important at the time, it turned me around. It sent me looking for the other kind of power, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't run dry. And everything that's been worth anything in my life since came out of that turning. So when I warn you off chasing the shadow, understand I'm not preaching at you from above it. I'm telling you what I found at the bottom of that particular hole, hoping you won't have to climb down into it yourself to learn the same thing. Let me come back to the heart of it, because I want you to leave with something solid in your hands, not just a good feeling that fades by tonight. That person is being formed in you right now, in the hard seasons especially, in the misunderstood years, in the pit, in the prison, in the garden, in the long stretches where nothing on the outside seemed to be moving and you wondered if you'd been forgotten. None of it was wasted. All of it was forging, and I want to name what this is actually for, because power without a purpose just curdles into pride. This isn't being released in you, so you can finally feel superior to the people who overlooked you. It's being released so you can be useful in a way that almost no one else can. The world is full of broken people sitting in falling apart rooms with no one steady to turn to. That man I told you about at the start of this, the one with no platform who moved more lives than anyone in his town, he wasn't given what he carried for his own comfort. He was given it for the neighbor with the failing marriage, the young man in trouble, the widow who couldn't get up in the morning. The power is for them. It always was. And the moment you understand that, it stops being a burden you carry alone and becomes the clearest reason you're here at all. Here's the part I most want you to take with you. This power isn't coming someday, off in a future you have to earn your way toward. The release is already underway. The very fact that these words found you, that something in you leaned in instead of scrolling past, tells me the ground in you is ready. You don't have to go get this. You have to stop overlooking what's already stirring. You have to quit measuring yourself with the broken instrument the world handed you and start trusting the deeper thing you felt your whole life but were taught to ignore. The whisper is in you. It's been in you, and it's getting louder, not in volume, but in clarity. The strength is settling into your bones. And one of these days, sooner than you think, you'll find yourself in a room that's falling apart, and you'll be the steady one. Someone will be drowning, and you'll be the one who says the true thing that pulls them up. You won't have planned it. It'll just come out of you because by then it'll be what you're made of. That's the power. That's what's being released. And the world won't see it coming because the world never does. Before you go, I want to hear from you. And I mean that. I read these. Tell me about a time you carried something steady into a situation that had no business staying calm. A moment when you were the unmoved one in a shaking room, even if you didn't have words for it then and only see it now looking back. Put it down below in your own words. Someone scrolling through, feeling alone in exactly the way we talked about today, is going to read what you write and recognize themselves in it. And that recognition, one set-apart soul seeing another, might be the very thing that tells them they were never as alone as they feared. I'll be reading. Go in peace.